Cole Rush, it is March. It is like literally the last day of March that this is going up. So we're getting in just under the wire for our late screening. We're going to be on time with our late screening this month, believe it or not. We're talking about a film that really ages me and pains me to say turns 40 this year. Because I remember, yes, as with many movies I watched during my childhood, highly inappropriate to be watching it when I did, but it was like a staple in my household when it was on cable. Trading Places by John Landis from 1983. You had not seen this before, is that correct?
Yep, I had never even heard of this movie.
Wow.
Yep, I had heard of the TLC show Trading Spaces. They are not similar.
No, but I'm pretty sure that Trading Spaces would not have had its title if it had not been for Trading Places, which
Smart
preceded it by a
man.
few decades. Yeah. So this is a 1983 comedy. It was a big success. It was, John Landis is a director who's had a very storied career, and the 80s was, there was a large part of the 80s that were kind of his decade. He had his hits and misses, but his movies were always in the public consciousness. And this movie was, he did the Blues Brothers a couple of years before this. He kind of kicked things off with An American Werewolf in London and Animal House. Actually, I might have gotten those reversed, but he went from kind of horror comedy and he did like all-time, crazy snobs versus slobs college comedy. And now we have a slobs versus snobs sort of role reversal comedy in Trading Places. It's like a Philadelphia version of Wall Street. A ultra rich guy trades places with a guy from the street, all at the behest of two multi-millionaires who wager on who is going to succeed and or fail fastest. It's a fascinating premise. I hadn't watched this movie in decades, and so it was quite the experience to revisit it, especially when I rented it, I think on Amazon. They'll show you the rating. They'll say rated R for language, adult situations, and in this case, blackface. I was like, wait a second, what? I don't remember this. But then, of course, and we'll talk about this later, there's the scene on the train, which definitely counts. So, Cole, I grew up watching this movie. You had never seen it or heard of it. What did you make of Trading Places?
Man, you covered a lot of the stuff that I immediately noted. I was talking with a friend after having watched this. Actually, let me set the scene for you.
Okay.
Um, I had I was so busy on Monday that I missed my treadmill walk. And I like to make sure I get a certain number of miles in every week. And with Chicago's Comic-Con, I will be there today as you're watching this episode, folks. Man, time is a funny thing. But I knew it was coming up, so I thought I'm just gonna walk extra and I'll just throw on the movie. I put my computer on the cat tree, which is in front of the treadmill, and I watch the movie in my headphones on my Mac. And typically I walk about 50 minutes, and because I had to do double the amount, it was about an hour and a half. So I watched the bulk of this movie on the treadmill. And I thought, it's a comedy, it's lighthearted enough, it'll work out. And I actually really enjoyed watching a movie. Normally I read on the treadmill, and this was just a nice experience. It was a cool way to pass the time, and it was like a nice way to do something that I had to do on top of something I needed. I wanted to get my exercise in. This is all neither here nor there. But there's the scene for you. And I definitely got caught in my steps a few times when certain things happened in this movie. I think that there is a type of comedy movie that sort of exists as like a lampooning of certain types of culture that doesn't often have a ton of laugh out loud moments when you rewatch it in the modern day. And that's what Trading Places felt like to me. There were a few moments where I, did that little X through my nose and thought, this is a little bit funny. But mostly what I found humorous was the sort of effortless takedown of capitalistic tomfoolery at the highest level. That's what I would call it here. And I liked it. I was like, there are people today who exist in that same mindset and space. And what they look like and act like may be slightly different, but that sort of idea holds up. I also enjoyed elements of, there were takedowns of prejudice and certain preconceived notions. And as you mentioned, I think there are times when it veers way in the other direction, which is unfortunate, product of its time and all that stuff. But those were some of the moments where I kind of misstepped on the treadmill and was like, whoa, like did not expect this to happen. And those moments for me, which I'm sure we'll get into, make it difficult for me to recommend that anybody watch this movie today. And I try to think about the balance between those moments that looking through a modern lens are, not okay, and the things it does that are good, which I do think exist. I think there are some interesting moments that sort of push against what the status quo was back in the 80s and say, like, no, people can succeed despite what you think of them originally. And finally, I love Eddie Murphy. I think he's fucking hilarious. He is one of the people that made me laugh. I'm not a huge Dan Aykroyd fan personally.
What?
Yeah, I just every movie I've seen with him, I'm just like, it's just yeah, I don't know. It's a unique style of comedy that just sort of I don't feel like lives too much in our current era. Like this sort of it kind of takes itself somewhat seriously as a satire, and it's sort of a unique intersection of comedy and drama and satire that you don't really find reproduced today. I think a lot of comedies now try to go for laugh out loud, gut punching stuff. And this is a little bit more understated, which I find interesting thematically. So I do think there was some redeeming stuff about the movie. Am I racing to watch it again? Absolutely not. But I do think there was enough redeemable about it that I found it interesting and worth a discussion.
That's yeah. I mean, I'm there with you on a lot of that stuff. It's strange because I remember, and the movie was a massive hit, and it's hard to look at a comedy of the 40 years removed from the era in which it was created and really judge it, because I feel like this was kind of a riotous, laugh out loud comedy in its day. I think the unfortunate part, and I'm saying that this happened, I did not laugh a lot. I think I only laughed out loud once during this rewatch. And again, I haven't seen this movie in its entirety in decades. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's like, huh, that's clever, that's cute, that's wow, that's what that is. The one laugh out loud moment I think I had was I think Landis breaks the fourth wall twice in this movie. And I think both involve Eddie Murphy's character, Billy Ray Valentine, who I should set up is, there are these two multimillionaire brothers named the Dukes, and they are fabulously wealthy and very cruel and self-obsessed, and all they care about is money. They barely care about each other, which really is underscored at the end of the film. But they make a wager that they can take, one of their top rising star executives, Louis Winthorpe III, played by your favorite actor, Dan Aykroyd, and say, what if we were to take away his reputation, his job, everything? How long would it take for him to turn into, a criminal and a common, street thug? And could we take someone who is, a homeless person from the streets, Billy Ray Valentine, played by Eddie Murphy, and transform him into a top level, sophisticated executive? And they bet that they can destroy and create a man's life over $1. Which just makes it all the more obscene. But there's a scene where when they first get a hold of Eddie Murphy, or no, this is a little bit later. This is a bit after he's already kind of been, in, I guess, brought up to speed on what their plans for him are. They're trying to describe the stock market to him and things like orange juice and pork belly futures and all that stuff. And the one guy says, and this represents pork bellies. It's bacon. You might have it on a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. And Eddie Murphy at that point stops and looks at the camera, is like, really? And I hadn't remembered that part, and I didn't expect it watching it this time, because it's almost cartoonishly condescending with these two old guys. But
yeah.
That's the other weird thing about watching this movie is, the racism, the prejudice, some of the language is, it's unconscionable now. partially because it's not as understandable as it was back in 1983. That's not to say forgivable or correct, but when you're talking about two, ultra wealthy, probably generationally passed on multimillionaire guys who are in their probably 60s or 70s when this movie takes place, yeah, there's not a whole lot of, civil rights awareness going on
Right. There ain't no
when they're
tolerance in that house.
right, and they're not growing up in that environment. It is kind of shocking that they use the N word, and Eddie Murphy drops the F bomb a number of times, and I'm not talking about the one he usually drops.
Yeah.
Um, but in fairness to those instances, I'm gonna try and figure out how to say this. At least he was using it in the manner in which it is intended, and not as an insult. Just he was referring to actual gay people, or what he thought were gay people trying to put the moves on him, instead of just using that as a derogatory slur. Although he was using it as a derogatory slur, if you catch my meaning. When he's picked up in a limousine fresh out of jail by these two older upper crust white guys and brought into their mansion and given a bubble bath, he assumes that they might be trying to have their way with him,
I thought he
which
was
is
going
very
to burst
amusing.
into the hot tub song right then and there.
A
Um,
hot tub song.
yeah, I'm pretty sure he did it on SNL. Maybe I can't remember. Um, or maybe it wasn't Eddie Murphy. I'm pretty sure it was him. He had like a little hot tub sketch. Um, but yeah, I mean, you bring up interesting points because there's a lot of stuff in here, and you've brought up the big ones, right? And I noticed all of those things, and I cringe at them. I'm an elder millennial. I like that stuff makes me squirm. And it's hard to balance having seen it and watching it, with the understanding of the context. And it's exactly like you say, not forgivable, completely unconscionable. It was made in the 80s, and it exists. And I was very happy to hear that you saw the rating and it called some of these things out. So that I appreciated. What I found interesting was if you take it more to a micro level, there are other sort of like things that would have just been expected and thought of in the 80s beyond the blatant racism, homophobia, etc. Like one moment that I laughed at numerous times was when they accused Winthrop of having heroin, and he always corrects them and said, "It's angel dust." And
Hey.
it's sort of this like war on drugs era where, correcting them is really a point of diminishing returns for him. And then you have Jamie Lee Curtis's character, who is a sex worker who, like is probably one of the more redeemable and like lovable characters in the entire thing. So like that is a more progressive portrayal of a sex worker than I've seen in many of the movies we've watched, which I found
because
very interesting.
she's I think this is Landis and the screenwriters. One of the things I think really works about this movie is they take, and it's to the benefit and also in one case to the detriment, particularly in Eddie Murphy's character, which I'll talk about in a second. But they take each archetype and they play around with the expectations, right? Jamie Lee Curtis's character is, she's a prostitute, right? But she's also very knowledgeable about stocks and bonds and savings and all of that. So she can speak Lewis's language, and he's the first to look down on her. She's involved in kind of helping to destroy his life inadvertently, but they end up kind of living together and teaming up. So when they can engage on a level that's completely unexpected to Lewis and to us, I think it really underscores the idea that really anything could happen in this movie, and not to get too comfortable in your preconceived notions about these characters.
Yeah, it's almost like a this is a weird comparison, man, but Babysitter's Club or Adventures in Babysitting.
Adventures in
That's what it
Babysitting,
is.
yes.
Where kind of like it sets what it tells you what, like it basically says here's what you think this movie is going to be, and then it becomes something completely different at every single turn. And I think that is where the similarities end. But it's a very unique sort of take on these characters. I think that so many comedies rely on archetypes and they try to draw humor from them, and I think that can be funny. But in this case, the subversion is what's funny. And there are funny moments where um, Billy Ray Valentine, for example, he goes into a bar and takes everybody to his new house, and he quickly realizes this is not the crowd he wants to be with, kicks them all out, and the butler's like, oh, well, what happened to your friends? He's like, they were my friends. They were freeloaders. And like the quickness of his turnaround adds to sort of like the comedic whiplash of the entire movie for me. Um, and then you see him succeed in this world. I just find it very unique among comedies these days. And like, there are body switching comedies where you kind of learn more about each other. But I think what's interesting about this one is, yeah, they're effectively switching places, but they're learning more about the other's situation than they are about what it is like to exist in that person's body. It's not a Freaky Friday type ordeal where you're increasing your relationship with somebody by living in their shoes, which I guess is literally what happens in the movie as I'm describing it right now.
Well, no,
But
I want to pull over a second because you just drew something to my attention. And maybe this is the whole product of the time thing, but it's almost unfair because we see Eddie Murphy, who was, the glimpse we get into Billy Ray Valentine's life before he gets, kind of transformed by the Dukes is very much, he's hanging out in, black neighborhoods. All of his friends are, racial minorities. And then he gets thrust into this world where everybody is white but the help. Then you've got Dan Aykroyd's character, who, when he hits the slums, he's hanging out with, he's still just surrounded by white people. I don't know if that's a comment on the segregation of, of certain neighborhoods or whatever, but it would just been interesting because, and I'm starting to come up with several critiques of this movie now that I'm thinking about it in depth with you. At the end of the film, and this is a spoiler, 40 years old, sorry. At the end of the film, both guys become fabulously wealthy, right? With them ostensibly having learned lessons about being good people and treating each other kindly or whatever. But there's just kind of short shrift given to, like, Aykroyd. He starts out surrounded by filthy rich white people. He ascends to the pits of hell in Philadelphia, surrounded by, more kind of like scheming white people. There's not like a sense of living in the other's shoes the way that there is with Eddie Murphy's character. I'm struggling here trying to find it, and I apologize because it's the first time I'm really thinking about these ideas. But it almost like seems like there's an imbalance. Like the poor black people of the ghetto that Billy Ray Valentine essentially came from are all but forgotten by the end of the picture.
Well, and I think part of the issue you're getting at here is like the movie wants you to believe that Winthrop is just getting back on his feet is a reward in itself, but like he was already rich and wealthy. He already had all this great life. And Eddie Murphy's character kind of gets what he never had. I think the problem for me is that they learn nothing. Like they really just both end up wealthy and on a beach, and it's like, what's to stop these two guys from being the next two Dukes that do this to some poor soul? We don't like, and I think that a lot of comedies, they kind of push their morals on you with a very like, emerald colored glasses sort of vibe. They kind of just like give you a really hokey lesson at the end. And this one doesn't even really make an attempt to do that. It just says like, revenge is a dish best served. End of sentence. And it's hard to grapple with that because like, yeah, it's supposed to be a comedy. And it reminds me of like Office Space, which I've only seen once and I can't remember any of the characters, but it has that same trope of the character on the beach at the end having like overcome all of this. And I think that I'm also now coming to this conclusion. It's like, for a movie that does a really good job of taking down the wealthy in a sense and kind of lampooning them and their culture, it still submits to the ideology that like wealth is the goal. And sure, they may have learned something about each other, but like, the wealth is the true friends we made along the way message that I kind of craved from this movie isn't really what I end up getting. A more fitting end, if I was going to write this movie in the 80s, for which I was not alive, would be, them moving to a neighborhood and using what they have learned to help those communities rather than just existing on a beach and being rich. It's like, yeah, these guys won, but like, was I really rooting for them? I don't know. I don't think I was.
And that's an excellent point. I mean, I think about a movie like Dave, Kevin Kline switching places with the president of the United States. And we'll get back to Office Space in a second. Let me forget that. But that's a situation where Dave Kovic was Kevin Kline's character. He worked as in his community helping, people find jobs, and he switches places with this George Bush senior, Republican president guy who doesn't care about the people at all. It's all about the lust for power. And at the end, he makes the choice to go back to his community. Now he gets the girl at the end, but that's the former first lady leaving her world of kind of privilege behind to go and help people because that's what she was all about. And there's some really great lessons in that movie about people who had started off in community service and trying to do good, ascending the ranks of power and getting lost and finding their way back to what really matters to them. In Office Space, it's a little bit different because the character ends up on the beach as Milton, who's the guy who wanted his stapler and ended up,
Right.
talking about setting the building on fire. That's a bit different because he had been the low level kind of office drone who was relegated to the basement and nobody respected him and everything. So he kind of deserves to have things to have some victory at the end. But Peter, the main character from Office Space, what does he do? He ends up going to work on a construction site because he realizes that sitting in an office, pushing numbers around, that isn't fulfilling. He wants to get out and do something to build something to really contribute instead of just working at Initech for the rest of his life. So I feel like those two movies are odd evolutions of the promise of Trading Places, which is to getting to your point. What are you going to do with the big money? I know that's a Clockwork Orange line, but there's at the end of this, the rich guy's richer than he was before. And, Eddie Murphy is now fabulously wealthy. I don't feel like they're going to become the next Dukes based on the kind of character that we see evolve over the course of the film, but you also have to realize they're swimming in the same waters. They're still betting on, probably things like orange juice futures. I don't think they took their hundreds of millions of dollars and just stopped trying to make more. It's kind of ambiguous, but it doesn't feel like a victory.
Right. It feels sort of diluted. Um, and I don't think that it's the responsibility or burden of a movie to have some sort of message. I just feel like when I look at a story now, I look for some sort of narrative cohesion with the themes. And I think that that's a result of media having evolved so much in the time since this movie came out. And audiences now want a little more. I think that, not to say you come from an era of dum-dums by any means, but I think that like there wasn't as much respect for audiences in the past. I still think there is a big lack of it today in many different storytelling mediums, but I think that the desires have changed as people have started to understand stories on a deeper level and been able to internalize them. And it's what gives us movies like Memento and like any Nolan film, you have these weird sort of like political ambiguity films. And that's not to say that they haven't existed before. Look at Space Odyssey. That I think that movie massively respects its audience. And I do think that Trading Places does it to a degree as well. Like with some of the issues we've talked about, it offers some pretty nuanced takes, at least in the crux of the film, on what it means to be wealthy, what it means to be in the finance industry. And it's pretty self-aware in its takedown of these, like when the scene where they're all singing the alma mater song of whatever school, all the finance bros, that shit cracks me up.
Well, especially because I watched this with my wife, and you realize they're talking about a girl in the song and basically how easy she is and how she like sleeps around. She's sitting right there. It's like the finance bros singing to their girlfriends, and the I guess the one that gets passed around the group, she's sitting right there and she's like laughing and carrying on. And my wife she was mildly horrified, like, what is this movie? Like,
Yeah.
it's the 80s.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like what this movie is and some of the ideas it was trying to do eventually became the prestige drama Succession on HBO.
which I haven't
Um,
seen. I've heard really good things about it.
so I've seen most of season one. I'm not as caught up with everybody else. Um, but for those who don't know, I love a good takedown of corporate America. And I love a good satirical take on how terrible it is. And Succession is like it's a wealthy family and they're all doing shitty stuff to try to control that wealth. It's obviously very different from Trading Places, but it serves a similar function in that it kind of shows us the ridiculousness of this world. And it makes for really interesting characters to me because I I have a lot of ambitious and career driven friends, and I would say some of them even border on like very narrow minded in their pursuit of that ambition. Whereas to me, I find more joy in connecting with people over things that aren't just their work. If you're
Hmm.
passionate about it, I think that's fantastic. Um, but there's definitely this image, especially in the US, of like your work is your identity. And I think that Trading Places actually occupies an interesting space within that sort of realm because you have Winthrop, who I don't even get the sense that he like loves the world in which he exists, but I do think he loves what it gives him. Um, and
Yeah.
and that sort of redeems him slightly as a character for me because I get the sense that he's going through the motions a little bit and sort of just like enjoying what it gives him. And it kind of reminds me of myself, not in that I am rich, because I am most certainly not, but in that I have chosen a profession that gives me the means to live a life that I want to live, right? So I have a certain amount of freedom, and that is what makes me happy. And that's an amount of nuance in a comedy that you don't necessarily get all of the time. He's not quite as one-dimensional as he looks. I still like Billy Ray Valentine better because I think he gives us a window into a unique experience that wasn't always given the time of day in the 80s. But the characters in this movie, a lot of them do that, and a lot of them are far beyond one-dimensional. As we mentioned, Jamie Lee Curtis is one of them.
I want to talk about Billy Ray Valentine because this was a kind of a point of contention on this viewing that I hadn't experienced before, probably because this is the only time I've watched this movie really as an adult, like thinking about all the stuff the movie has to offer. When his first several scenes, he's homeless, he's pretending to be disabled, he's kind of like pulling cons on people. He gets he's a swift talker. Like there's a great scene in the kind of the holding cell where he's mouthing off to these two big dudes, one of who's is like the prototype for John Wick. He just says yeah a lot. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but you still watch The Mandalorian?
I do not.
Oh, do you remember The Mandalorian?
I remember I watched all but 2 episodes of the first season.
Oh, okay. So you probably didn't get to Moff Gideon. Anyway, one of the actors in the jail cell with Eddie Murphy is a fine actor named Giancarlo Esposito. He was also in I think Breaking Bad and a number of other shows.
I love Giancarlo.
Okay, yeah, he was one of the guys in the cell.
I didn't
And
even notice.
yeah, well, I was looking at this and like, God, is he like 22 or something? I mean,
Yeah.
like he had pimples and everything. Like, wow.
I love
Um,
him in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, obviously. He also plays an excellent character in The Boys.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, he was also
so
fantastic. I first recognized him in Do the Right Thing back in 1989, playing Bugging Out. But anyhow, back to Eddie Murphy. When he gets swept up by the Dukes and kind of like, cleaned up and given all this kind of proper, I guess, etiquette training or whatever, there's a bit where they're sitting in the office talking about I think pork belly futures, and Billy Ray starts making all these calls like, don't do that. You want to hold. This is going to change. I'm like, there's never any bridge between the wisecracking, kind of crazy acting street guy and this dude who's making these intuitive decisions about pork belly futures. I'm like, why does he know this? It's like from that point on, he's a completely different character. I mean, even when he goes to the bar in his neighborhood, you'd almost expect there to be him putting on the airs of someone, like making, I'm trying to figure this out, the best way to say it. Um, Dan Aykroyd's character, when he goes to the pawn shop, say, he's using his kind of lived experience and clashing up against the harsh reality of like, yes, this watch, it tells time in like 13 different countries, including Stad. And the guy behind the counter is like, this thing, I think it was Bo Diddley actually. He's like, this thing's hot. I'll give you $50 for it. Billy Ray doesn't really, I don't think he really encounters that when he interacts with the real world, because he seems to know a lot more than his character led on in the earlier scenes of the movie. Am I making any sense here?
So I think you're right, and I think the reason for it is I think the movie wants us to draw the line between like we know that he is a con man because he's pretending to be a homeless person, collecting money. He pretends to be an amputee, and I think they want us to draw the line between like he does that. He is just as good a con man as these stockbrokers, who are trying to game the system. I'm not saying they do a good job at leaping with us to that conclusion, but I think that's the line they're trying to draw is like this guy's capable at deceit on a level that you don't realize because he's a con man. I think it's more of a dotted line. I think they're two very different worlds, but I do think that's the connection they're trying to draw.
I feel like there have been other comedies in which there's someone from a lower caste kind of brought up into, the higher caste that do a better job of kind of the fake it till you make it thing. I think if Billy Ray Valentine had been more lucky in his prediction of those stock futures, like he had just taken a guess and the only people who knew that he was guessing was himself and us. Because in that scene with the Duke brothers, you get the sense that he really does know what he's talking about. I'm like, how the hell does he know what he's talking about?
Right.
Like,
Well, and what he says, it could be said by anybody. I've bullshitted my way through many a presentation, don't get me wrong, and you kind of speak in platitudes and hope that people nod their heads. And
well,
but
he's talking specifically about like the way that the trade or the trade is possibly going to go down, including like figures and different like names. I watched this thing a few nights ago, so it's a bit of a blur.
yeah, I'm
But
thinking of the
later on,
scene.
when he becomes an executive, at Duke and Duke, he kind of slips right into that. There's never any like, what the
Yeah.
hell are you people talking about? It's like, oh yeah, before I was homeless on the street, I was actually a Wall Street trader, which would have been an interesting take.
Right. I'm thinking of one scene where he talks about, oh, these people want their Christmas bonuses or whatever, and that felt to me very like fake and just kind of lucky. But I think you're right in that like, yeah, it's very just quick, and they don't give us anything to fill in those details. It's like I said, I think the movie wants us to make a certain connection, sort of says just go with it. And I think that if you start unpacking a lot of the logistics about this movie, it's like what is actually happening, how does he like how does it work that he quote unquote owns this house now? Like what sort of details did they sort of actually work out? And how is the butler just suddenly in on it? Like why does he care? What are they paying him off? I think there's a lot of things that just sort of start to fall apart. And it's again, the movie just kind of is asking you to like shut your brain off and enjoy the funny moments. But again, we're watching it in 2023, and I think it's harder to do that now, because we ask a lot more of the content we're watching because there is so much of it, that when you put on Trading Places, you kind of start to notice the cracks a little bit.
Yeah, and it's kind of unfortunate. You know, because it's such a classic comedy that, is referenced in certain circles and highly regarded by people of a certain age, it is kind of hard to say, hey, watch this. It's gonna, aside from the cringe moments, it's hilarious, and it might, people's mileage might vary. Ironically, and I've read that, this is sort of Landis's throwback to the screwball comedy, which might explain why it's kind of paper thin. But for me, there's a bit involving a train, the kind of the climax of the movie. And it's ironic because the moment they get on the train, the movie goes off the rails. It becomes this completely different thing. There's Paul Gleason plays a guy named Clarence Beeks, who is sort of the hired goon of the Duke brothers, who is, it's all kind of like corporate and government espionage. He's trying to get the orange juice futures report early so that he can give the Dukes the advantage, so that they can buy when it's low and sell when it's high. That's the kind of the motto of the movie. But in order to get this briefcase that has the info in it, He gets on a train, and then Valentine, Winthrop, the butler, and Ophelia, who's Jamie Lee Curtis's character, who we haven't named up to this point, they all get on the train in wacky disguises, including,
Quote
and this is where
unquote.
yeah, and this is where the blackface part comes in, because Dan Aykroyd shows up wearing, dressed as a Jamaican, doing this like horrible accent and just like barely even trying. Um, and you also get Jim Belushi in an ape costume. You get future Senator Al Franken and his SNL writing partner Tom Davis as these two like baggage handlers for the train. And for about 15, 20 minutes, this movie just, it feels like they literally took a bunch of rejected SNL jokes and threw them onto a train during a New Year's Eve costume party. What?
Yeah, I mean, what is exactly my reaction to most of that? And it's a lot of it just feels like plot devices to move it along. The blackface was incredibly hard for me to watch. Like I was just like, God damn, like I can't do this. And you start thinking like they could have dressed him up as anybody they wanted. They could have just put him in a beard and had him be Santa. Like that's equally as not recognizable. But again, like I'm not making the movie. It was 40 years ago.
Well,
It's just sort of sad because it's like that sort of thing now taints my viewing of it. And it sort of just makes me sad on the level of like, I wish we had known better even back then, and that it's sort of like I sometimes burden myself with the weight of societal sadness.
it's
And that
okay.
happens in this
Cole,
movie.
you weren't there. It's okay. I
I was
absolve
yet
you.
to be born.
Yes. But no, I mean, like it's a tricky thing because, and I haven't really thought, like a lot of things in this conversation, I haven't completely thought it through, but if I had to guess, I mean, the people making this movie were not racist, but they did traffic in, the humor of the time, which was not as, I guess, and this is going to sound bad, but things weren't as sensitive, or at least in the mass culture, as they are today. Um, so I'm wondering if the blackface thing was because it was so ridiculous and over the top, it was meant to get a laugh. Like, wouldn't it be crazy if Dan Aykroyd pretended to be this Jamaican or to fool this guy? Because unless he showed up in a beard or, otherwise fully disguised, Clarence Beeks knows what Winthrop looks like because he helped bring him down. But it also circles back around in that those characters are playing on the perceived ignorance of this guy, thinking, hey, if I just dress up, if I just paint myself in blackface, this racist white guy is so clueless, he's just going to think that all black people look the same, so he's never going to find me out. But Beeks turns it around. He's like, you really didn't think I'd recognize you?
Well, and what's interesting is like they try to impersonate these people, and it falls apart real fast because if it is a New Year's Eve costume party, like Eddie Murphy's character is supposed to be like an actual person from Cameroon. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, then why is he like that? So he's not dressed up. He's not part of the costume party. And a lot of it just sort of just like doesn't work. And it all just feels like an excuse to do these bits.
Unless he was a regular guy pretending to be someone from Cameroon, because you're right. Ophelia shows up dressed like the Swiss Miss girl, and she's like, "I'm Inge van Sweden." I'm like, okay, and
Yeah,
you're not pretending at that point, yeah.
yeah, and well, then you end up with Clarence Beeks drawing a gun, and yeah, you're right. It goes completely off the rails. Um, and it kind of feels like a fever dream moment in the movie because then it gets the sort of ending where they go into the trading pits. I sort of wish the movie was more about stuff like that, because I was interested in sort of like that environment and how it worked and the chaos of it all. And I wish that they had invested more in like, this is me just rewriting the movie. It's Trading Places script doctor with Cole Rush. But to me, the movie would have been more fun if it started more towards where it ended in that Valentine and Winthrop realize they're being had, and it's a longer play to take down the Dukes. And that involves Winthrop covertly teaching Valentine about his world and saying, let's take them down and take a piece for ourselves, and them sort of getting into that. And you know, Ophelia can then help too with some of her kind of acumen about this world. You know, I think that's a more compelling movie to me on paper, and that's not what this movie is. But as we talk about this sort of train scene, it's like a lot of the movie feels like an excuse to get jokes in, and I
Hmm.
think that I would rather have a more situational comedy type of film from this sort of concept.
Yeah, I mean, I'm there with you. I think we need to stop talking about 80s comedies, Cole, because you're the one who kind of ruined Ghostbusters for me when we talked about that a few years ago. I'm like, oh, this is great. And then we're watching it and like, I don't know what it is, but I was like, I don't really enjoy this anymore. Maybe it's because I was trying to watch it through younger eyes. Maybe that's a mistake. That's the lesson learned.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that well, that's what I love about chatting about movies with you is like they are good barometers for how much we change as people over time. Um, and it's a really interesting point of view to like define yourself against the media that you either grew up with or haven't seen in my case, and think about how it has changed you having watched it now. In the case of Trading Places, what's changed most is that I wish I hadn't and had watched something else.
hey, I thought you liked this
No,
movie.
I generally did enjoy the watch. I thought there were things I liked about it. I just couldn't miss getting a dig at you.
Nah,
Um,
thanks.
and
Hey,
I
hey,
think I think I like probably 80% of the movies you have me watch. So that's a good rate.
yeah. In fairness to Ghostbusters, I did see it after we watched it and talked about it. I saw it actually last fall. There was a live accompaniment at the Chicago Philharmonic, and they actually played the film, but all of the instrumentals were done with a live orchestra, which was pretty incredible.
Yeah,
Highly
I've seen
recommend
those
it.
with Harry Potter before.
Really, what was he like? Sorry. Um, no. Um, but no, but I'm saying like I enjoyed, I don't know if it was the experience or whatever, but I enjoyed Ghostbusters. I still wasn't as jazzed about it when I was a kid, but I wasn't as down on it as when we talked. So I guess the lesson is movies change with you, and sometimes your opinion decades later may not necessarily be your same opinion decades on, even if you feel like you've changed your mind a couple of times, that's okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, if you had asked me years ago, like, what's your favorite type of movie, comedy probably would have been right up there. You know, we all know I love Borat. And you know, there's a lot of different. I love Hot Rod, Napoleon Dynamite, like the stupid 2000s comedies are right up my alley. And I still think those movies are funny, but um, you know, now I look for movies that are more impactful to me as a person, like, and that make me sort of think about something. And those are the favorite discussions I end up having. And you know, I always come back to 2001. Like, I think that was a fundamental shift in how I consume and interpret the media I consume or I enjoy. And you know, ever since I think comedies are fun, but like I rarely seek them out. I rarely go to movies in theaters, you know, let alone watch them at home. But now I'm seeking out good and meaningful stories. And I think that the good ones can contain comedy. They don't have to be labeled a comedy to contain it. And when I watch a movie that labels itself as a comedy, I almost know inherently that they're going to take shortcuts to get to the comedy portion. And it just becomes boring to me because
Hmm.
I want the story to contain comedy and feature it and lift it up rather than strive for it as a goal.
Speaking of goals, and I'm going to be the last, for the first to admit that I am the last one to probably watch this series. So don't laugh at me. Have you watched Ted Lasso?
I have, yes.
That to me is, I mean, it's a TV series and it's not a movie, but that's sort of what, for me, what you're describing is something that's very funny, but also very human and has a lot to say. Now, we just finished watching season one last night,
Mm-hmm.
mostly because it's one of those things where we had, I think, a free trial of Apple TV and it expires in
Yep.
like 2 weeks. And so we're like, because we don't watch anything on this channel. We're just going to let it go. And then we're like, well, let's watch Ted Lasso. Everyone's talking about how great it is. And we've been like binge watching it every night this week. Um, we might even just keep Apple like re up it just so we can finish season three when we catch up with it. but yeah, but that's also, something that came out a few years ago, several decades on from what is at the time, a very funny, wacky premise that had a lot to say. I mean, something else to consider is this is only, it's less than 20 years, or just about 20 years, 19 years removed from, the Civil Rights Act and the idea of Eddie Murphy. Richard Pryor was sort of before him, but becoming like a giant movie star. So racial consciousness was it was sort of newer to like mass entertainment. So this may have been a lot of folks' kind of introduction to, the whole like black and white dynamics and one's from the hood and one's from the mansion kind of thing. Doesn't necessarily resonate now because we're 4 decades on from it, and there's been a lot of progress in a lot of ways in terms of like mass culture and mass entertainment. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, Cole. I've kind of lost myself.
I mean, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, even though you don't feel like you have, is that the cultural shift in sort of content has been vast, and you sort of realize, and it's like we talked about earlier, audiences can be relied on more to make connections and appreciate multifaceted works of art. No longer are we shackled to a genre. A thing doesn't have to be one genre. It's why people love Marvel. They have sci-fi and fantasy. There's comedy in there. I know it's very palatable to the masses, but you mentioned Ted Lasso, which I think is an excellent example. Another one that I really liked recently is Hacks, or also the other two HBO shows. Hacks is about a sort of washed up comedian in Vegas hiring a Gen Z writer to sort of amp up her career, but the Gen Z writer has been canceled for some insensitivities.
Huh.
It's very good. It stars Gene Smart, and it is just a really fun series. Highly recommend. And then the other two is about a kid who basically becomes like a Justin Bieber-esque pop star overnight. His name is Chase Dreams, and his it is about his two older siblings and how they navigate his rise to fame, and how they connect as a family. And Molly Shannon plays the mom.
Wow.
It is probably one of the more criminally underrated series that has aired in the past few years. Both of them are actually, well, Hacks won a bunch of Emmys, so I can't say that, but the other two is also just phenomenal, and it couches all of this in like funny ass scripts, and it's just very good, and it's these types of shows I think can fly under the radar because people expect them to be one thing, but like you throw them on and they're hilarious, and they have meaningful things to say, and they don't sacrifice one for the other. So yeah, Ted Lasso is a good one. I highly recommend Hacks and the other two for anybody who's interested.
Excellent. Well, damn it, now I'm gonna have to re-up my HBO Plus apparently.
Well, you've
I
got
love
a
these
billion HBO shows to watch. You've got How To with John Wilson as well.
I love these conversations, Cole, because they cost me money. Money that I don't even have to invest in orange juice futures or pork bellies. But anyhow, any closing thoughts on Trading Places?
I am content to put this movie in my past, having enjoyed the experience of analyzing it with you per usual.
Well, thank you. And same here. And next month, I'm happy to say we're stuck in 1983 because we're going to be talking about another movie that is pure American capitalism and pure cocaine. Yes, that is Scarface. You want to talk
two phrases that describe me.
Scar and face? What? No.
Are we going to say hello to a little friend?
We are. We're also going to say hello to some historically problematic portrayals of ethnic minorities in the Al Pacino playing a cartoonish Cuban gangster. But yeah, I haven't watched that movie in probably 10 years. I'm excited for you to see it because yeah, everybody knows the "say hello to my little friend" line, but the scene, the context in which it takes place in the movie is one of the most spectacular bloodlettings I've seen in a movie.
I have seen that clip.
I mean, it goes on for a while, so I don't know if
I've seen at least like 2.5 minutes of it.
Okay. It's fun. But anyway, we'll be back next month talking about that for late screening. In the meantime, Cole, what do you have to promote? Where can people find you, and what do you want them to look at?
Oh man, I've been writing so much lately. ColeRush.com has all of my stuff. I am doing a follow-up to my animation article that I recently shared, in which I take 3 of the people who responded to the survey who don't love animation, and I'm making them each watch 2 animated movies. And I am discussing their thoughts with them over Zoom, and then I'm going to kind of compile it all into an interview and talk about the findings. So I'm very excited for this.
Can you tell us which movies, or are those spoilers?
I'm happy to tell you. So each of them is watching 2 movies. I gave
Two,
all of
two
them.
different movies.
So I gave all of them one of the same movie, and then each person has one separate movie.
All right.
So there are a total of 4 discussed. So I gave them, and I know you don't like this movie, but I think it's a good entryway to animation, Kubo and the Strings. Um, so that's the common movie. And my father-in-law will be watching Sing because he asked for talking animals. My friend who is a film producer actually watching Intergalactic on Netflix. And my cousin-in-law will be watching Marcel the Shell.
Oh, I just watched that for the first time a couple months
I
ago.
remember
I
we talked
love
about
that.
that during the rehearsal chat. Wasn't it
Yeah,
phenomenal?
it was so good.
I thought it
Yeah.
was just like one of the best movies I've seen in a few years. I was so impressed.
I avoided it like because it played at the Chicago Critics Film Festival last year before it, came out anywhere. And I was like, it looks cute, and everyone I knew was raving about it, but I'm like, I don't know. And then I finally broke down to watch it. I was like, I am so glad I watched this movie. Um,
I remember you
cool.
saying during our rehearsal chat, you were like, I haven't seen a movie that has made me think and feel. And I remember I said Marcel the Shell is that movie.
Yeah.
And I feel vindicated. Let's go.
Hey, one last question. Have you
Yep.
seen The Iron Giant?
Yes, I have.
Okay, because that was one I can't remember what I was watching. Oh, it was Ted Lasso because there's an episode where the soccer team watches The Iron Giant and Ted talks to his coach. He's like, "We got to get out of here because in about 45 minutes you're going to have a room full of like crying men or something like that." But yeah. Well, all right. Thanks for talking trading places, Cole. Everybody go check out Cole's stuff at colerush.com. The link will be down below. And join us back next month for Scarface. Until then, whenever that is, we know whatever that is. But yeah, take care.
Fairly well, everybody, and talk to you. Oh man, terrible closer. Goodbye.